Alrighty, let's begin code.org Computer Science Discoveries, Unit 3, Lesson 9, the Games and Animations Unit. We're going to be looking at some sprite properties today. So first we'll jump in with yet another prediction. If you already know what to put, great. If you want to guess, great. But you're looking at the code, where will the B sprite appear? This is adding some new options to us. If we want to relocate a B sprite, it would be at 350, 350, which is, if we go to our grid, the bottom right corner. That is correct. Ready? And I will start over with each of these, so see what you see when you're just starting. So when we run this one, again, it follows a video. Feel free to check that out. The videos are very well done by the code.org people. So it wants us to move the paintbrush so that it's just basically, I think it just wants us to move it. So change the location of the paintbrush to touch the paint palette. There we go. So we create a sprite called palette, and we set the animation to be the paint palette image. Again, you can go to your animations tab and see what's there. Remember, the sprite is the placeholder, and then the set animation sets the actual image to that placeholder. All right, so we could either, I guess it wants us to probably move the brush. So if I want to, remember, it's going to be the center of the sprite. So I'm going to go grid, and I'm going to go to 150, 250. So for the brush, I'm going to change its X to 150, and I'm going to change its Y to 250. All right, and now it is touching. Now, one thing you might be asking, right now, if we're not going to have actual live motion and moving animation, it's kind of pointless to set it in one spot and then move it elsewhere. It would be much easier to set it when we initialize. But there'll be a reason why we really need to get familiar with the X and Y properties. So that's why it's introducing it this way. If you notice, they have clicked the arrows for the sprite creation. So that no longer places it anywhere that we can see. But again, most of the time when you drag out that block, it's going to naturally put it at 200, 200. We've already experimented with moving it there, but if for whatever reason throughout your program you want it to change, this is how you do it. All right, level 3. This one looks like it had a lot in there. Okay, so this one, they're adding a whole lot more. So this is a loaded lesson. We're looking at all sorts of different properties. And if we look at our toolbox, if you remember when we first started, we had one option. It was drawing, and it was a rectangle. Now we've got our world menu, our drawing menu with all these options, our variables menu that's growing. We have math, and now we've got some different sprite options. So a few things going on. Let's just look at the program, see what happens. We have a sky blue background, then we create our sprite called drums, and we set the drum set, so that's the drum set right there. And we have a series of notes, 4 notes, and we're seeing some new properties applied. So just to run through those, so we create the sprite, set the animation, that's good practice. For note 1, it gets a scale of 0.3. What that means is that is 30% of the regular size. The rotation is the number of degrees it's rotated, and if you go in a positive direction, it rotates clockwise. If you go in a negative direction, it rotates counterclockwise. As you'll see here on note 2, it is scaled at 0.7, which is 70% of normal size, and it gets that negative rotation. So if you notice, it is rotated towards the left or counterclockwise, whereas this one rotated toward the right. So with scale, if you want it to be smaller than the regular size, it needs to be 0 point something. If you want it to be larger than the original size, then it needs to be a value greater than 1. So those are the main things. So what it wants us to do is use the rotation and scale blocks on the last 2 notes. So I'm going to go ahead and just for practice, I'll drag. I normally would copy and paste, but for note 3, we're going to scale note 3 to be 0.5, so half size. And let's do note 3, the rotation of 45. And we can reset and run. So now note 3, you can kind of see as it goes. And note 4 will do a scale and a rotation. So notice each time I am addressing, so you're starting to see why we have to create the object and give it a name so that this object has all these built-in properties that we can then apply. So note 4 is my sprite. It is the object that I want to adjust the property of. So let's scale this one at, let's go 0.9. And then let's give it a rotation that's counterclockwise. So note 4 is a sprite I want to change the rotation property of. So I'm going to do a negative, let's do a negative, the other one was a negative 30, wasn't it? Let's do a negative 45. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so we had some changes there. All right. Level 4, we've got some practice problems. We will run through each of these. All right, so practice 4A. And I will start it over. All right, so when we run it, we've got some characters that are a little bit too big. So what we want to do, and it does say, that kind of explains the scale property a little bit more. So we want to try to make it look like the image as best we can. So I'm going to scale everything to half size to start with. That way I will at least be able to see it all, and then I can go back and adjust accordingly. So if I change everything to half size, I reset and I run. Okay, it actually looks like the fly, the fishbowl, and the cow, that's probably fitting. The elephant is the one that looks like it's a little bit bigger than half size, so now I can go back and let's make that 0.75. And there we go. And that is pretty close to what I'm trying to duplicate. All right, maybe my fly is a little bit off, but it's kind of hard to tell. I'm going to roll with it. Maybe if we wanted to shrink it a little bit, we could do a 0.3 and see how that looks. Probably too small. I think the 0.5 was good. But there we go. All right, the rotation property. This one, always a fun one to do. And well, I guess there you are. People that created this probably realize that students get confused oftentimes when you have a sprite named the same thing as the image. That can be confusing, so I feel like we could have called it green car and done car green, but nonetheless, when we run it right now, we have green, yellow, blue, and red. But they're called, the sprites are car top, car left, car bottom, and car right. And we want them to be facing in the correct direction. So the green car is good to go, if you notice, and we're looking at the headlights, make sure it's facing the correct way. So I'm just going to start with this red one. We want it to rotate clockwise, turn to the right about 90 degrees. So I'm going to do a sprite rotation, and the name of the sprite that I want to rotate is car left, and I want to rotate it 90 degrees. I'm going to reset and run. It's good to go. All right, I'm going to come down here to the blue car, or the car bottom, and we want to update its rotation. And this one, if you don't pay attention, a lot of students overlook, but it's actually going the wrong way, so we want to turn it around completely in the other direction, so that would be a rotation of 180. It's good to go, and now the yellow car, which is referred to as car right, we want to update its rotation. And I always forget if this one's like 45, 30, or 60. It's not quite 90. Let's start out with a 45-degree rotation with it, and there we go. We're good to go. So we are now fixed. All right, this one, multiple properties, so it wants us to rotate and scale some of these properties. So to go in, obviously our astronaut space is probably the background, so we're going to leave that alone. So alien and astronaut. So let's scale the astronaut first, and let's do a 0.25. Let's reset. And I did a rotation, not a scale, so my bad. Let me try that again with the right code. Astronaut 0.25. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and rotate the astronaut. And in this image, I did a positive. Let's do a negative rotation for it. So let's do a negative 45. All right, and let's shrink that comet a little bit. So the name of that sprite is comet. Let's make it half size. And let's rotate it. So if I want to have it coming from that way, let's see, let's do about a 60-degree rotation on that. And let's see what that looks like. I could probably go a little bit more. Let's go up to 90. There we go. And our alien, if we want to rotate the opposite way, I guess right here for my astronaut, I could have done a positive 45. Let's just make it like the image. That was probably a positive 30. I'm trying to match it up just to... Okay, and then this one is probably a negative 30, maybe scaled down slightly. So let's scale the alien to, let's do 0.75. All right, and then let's do a rotation on the alien. And we will do a negative 30. All right, so we were pretty close to the example. I didn't move any X and Y rotations. Bonus, we could use variables and random numbers. We certainly could, but I'm not going to. But if you wanted to, you could certainly apply that for like your scales, give it a range of a maximum, minimum. Same thing with the rotations to add some variation. Okay, so we are done with the practice problems. Alrighty, this is the assessment for lesson 9. So we have got a plate. We just need to update the scale on each one. I already had it done. This one's pretty straightforward. It's just a little bit of trial and error. This is what I found to be about as close to that image as I can get it. It may not be perfect, but I scaled the fries to 0.7. I scaled the burger to 0.6, and I scaled the dessert to 0.6. And there's a little bit of white space around the edges of everything on the plate. The burger is slightly touching the fries. The watermelon is barely touching, so I feel like that's pretty close. So again, 3 lines of code: fries.scale, burger.scale, dessert.scale. Alrighty, these challenges add in a few extra properties that really the tint and the alpha, I don't think you have to use them at any point the rest of the way in Unit 3, but they are good to know. So this one, I think I already adjusted. You just kind of play around with that property. So whatever your animation is, it'll just kind of overlay a tint. So it's not going to completely change the whole thing to a solid color. It's just like you're laying a piece of plastic that's a certain color over an existing object, and it just kind of gives it that hue. So that's really all there is to tint. So just use an existing color. You could do RGB values. You could do like we did in a previous lesson and make a value for RGB and give each one a random number. you know, whatever you'd like to do. But that is pretty much it with the tint feature. All right. For this one, we have a giraffe that starts out not giraffe-like. So to make it appear to have a longer neck, we can increase its height. So the default size, we're not exactly sure what it is when it's created. I'm assuming it's probably not 200, but maybe 100. So this kind of makes it look larger, a little bit skinnier. If I went the other way, if I made the height, if I reset, make the height 100. So notice I did not scale it. It makes it kind of shorter and fat. So 300. All right, a little bit of an elongated neck, and you know, if I go all the way to 400, that really makes it look tall. Kind of accentuates the neck, so it's not adjusting in quite the original proportion. So that's the trick with height and width. If you want to make something a little bit more narrow and long, or a little bit shorter and wide, you can use those properties. Alrighty, and then the alpha property deals with transparency. So notice I'm very close. Opacity is really what we're looking at. So the closer it is to 1, the less transparent it is. The closer it is to 0, the more transparent. So right now 0.9. There's a little bit of an element of transparency. If you look, you can see the bricks appearing slightly, a little bit of the door frame. But if let's change this to like a 0.3, now it's a whole lot more transparent. So that alpha, something you might want to use depending on what you build later. It is nice that it's up and working. There were a few years where it did not work as intended, but that is a nice touch to have now. All right, and that concludes lesson 9.